Okay, this video is about amino acids. I'm going to start out from the point of view of health, so everyone who's interested in protein or amino acid will find that helpful. In the last part of this lecture, I'm going to go into the biochemistry of it because I get some medical students in biochemistry asking me, how does one memorize this stuff? Okay, so starting out with Napoleon here, he's crossing the Alps, and this is when he's going to go in to attack Italy. And he's imitating Hannibal, the conqueror who invaded Rome and crushed the Romans early on in the battles with Carthage. So cancer, seems so powerful like Napoleon did at first, but part of this lecture is going to be to show also how to prevent cancer with regard to amino acids. Once you understand how to starve cancer of the amino acids it wants, you can kind of do like what the Russians did to Napoleon. They starved him, sort of the scorch and burn approach to dealing with Napoleon. So he had to, he lost almost all of his troops, had to retreat out of Russia, and he was pretty much finished after that. He made a brief comeback, of course, and he got crushed at Waterloo. But that's what you want to do with cancer, is say, screw you, cancer. I'm not going to let you kill me. And I'm going to deprive you of everything you want, like methionine, like lysine, like leucine, like heme iron, okay? All right, so now this slide here is going to be very important for anybody who wants to know about nutrition, preventing cancer, and being healthy. This is really important information. Hardly anybody knows this. First of all, meat has a lot more protein than plants. In general, if you just wanted to use a rough number, you could think of 50% protein, 50% fat as your typical meat. Typically no carbohydrate in meat other than milk, of course. Okay, animal foods have very low protein in comparison. Your starches are typically, in this ballpark of 5 to 10%. The one exception is beans. Beans have up to around 25% protein. It's a good number for protein is 25% for beans. Rice is only about 5. That's white rice, about 5% in protein. And then even significantly lower in protein are fruits. That's why one of the reasons why fruits are such a fantastic food. So almost every idiot you talk to is going to think, where are you going to get your protein, like that's some desirable goal. The reality is there's no such thing as being too low in protein for any naturally occurring diet. And the real goal is, how does one minimize their protein intake? Now, Dr. John McDougall, he's the best nutrition doctor in the world. He's got a really nice lecture about protein called the Protein Mastermind Lecture. And here's what he's going to tell you. Human breast milk has about 6% protein. Actually, if you look at all the papers, some say 5, 6, or 7, probably 6% on average. But the bottom line, let's call it 5 to 6%. That's the highest protein demand you're ever going to have is when you're a baby, okay? You don't need that much protein. You want to minimize it. Humans only probably need about 3%, 2.5 to 3% as adults. And there's data suggesting that it's not just caloric restriction, which comes from eating a plant diet, but also protein restriction that increases longevity. And there's a lot of reasons to believe why that will increase your health. In general, meat eaters tend to get 17 to 60% of their calories from protein. Now that's a wide gap. The 60% is more like if you're eating the Atkins diet or paleo low carb diet, which are very going to be very high in protein. If you're just eating a standard American diet, maybe around 25%, but you're getting way too much protein. I don't care which variation of that you are. You're getting too much protein and too much fat. Plant eaters typically are eating about 7 to 14% protein. Kempner diet, which was a rice diet, about 5% protein with fruits, which are even lower than that, was only about 4% protein. And his patients were very healthy. High protein diets are associated with a lot of problems. They elevate postprandial cortisol about 25%, which you don't want. A lot of bad things happen with elevated cortisol. It's like elevating your stress level. Increases insulin resistance and whatnot amongst other negative things. The vegan diet is the best path to lowering your dietary protein. The protein amounts in plant foods, like I said, the beans are high in about 25%. And I do eat beans every day, but I try to limit the quantity. If I had cancer, I would maybe quit eating beans. There's a reason why beans are not so bad. And Dan Buettner with the Blue Zones, he suggests that all of them eat beans, and it's one of the healthiest foods in the world. And I actually do think beans are quite good. But we'll talk about the problem with beans, and the beans have a saving grace as well. Then grains are kind of next. They have an intermediate amount of protein. corn and oats are then less and less, and then potatoes much less. White rice a little bit less, and sweet potatoes the lowest. And this is why also sweet potatoes has sometimes been described as the healthiest food in the world. I actually think potatoes, rice, and sweet potatoes are the three best foods in the world, and rice has really sort of dropped a notch because of all the concerns about arsenic. We talk about that in a separate lecture. Okay, I say amino acids are like Irish females. Okay, why am I saying that? Well, the Irish word for female in slang Irish is lass, okay? I went to Ireland many years ago, and my uncle sees me there with my sister, and he says, "Oh, here's me cousins, the Yanks, and here's me niece, Susan. She's a fine lass, ain't she? And here's me nephew, Peter. I'm Peter the Second. He's Peter the Third." So I got called Peter the Third for a long time by my family after that. But I tell you lass because this is what medical students have to know. They have to know that it's a left isomer. It's also what's called S configuration, but you need to know it's a left isomer. That's going to end up being a useful thing to know. There's 9 essential amino acids, and that's relevant because if you want to starve cancer, you want to starve it of the essential amino acids. So the essential amino acids, the isoleucine is a branched chain amino acid, so is leucine. And leucine in particular activates mTOR, a nutrient sensing pathway that when it has all the building materials, like a building contractor getting ready to build a building, it says, okay, now we've got leucine, let's go ahead and have the cell replicate. So if you're a 20-year-old bodybuilder doing curls for the girls, you want perhaps more branched chain amino acids. If you're over 40 and you're afraid of getting cancer or dying of cancer, you don't want branched chain amino acids, okay? And they're a lot more common in meat, much more common in meat. So that's another reason there to avoid meat and some of these processed foods. In addition, meat will have a lot more methionine. Methionine is a sulfur-containing amino acid, relatively unique structure. It's involved in the methyl cycles related to producing new DNA. So it's a requirement. It's an essential amino acid, meaning that your bodies can't make it on their own, and it's a requirement for cancer growth. So you want to minimize your methionine intake, which is another reason to avoid meat. This is what I'm talking about, the Russian scorched earth policy, which they used to defeat Napoleon, and they also used that to defeat Hitler in World War II. So that's like page number 1 of any military strategy book is don't attack Russia, okay? Because you'll starve to death. It's so big and it's a shithole. Why do you want that place anyways? So anyways, let's see what else is next. They talk about, animal proteins being a higher quality protein because they're more complete, having a larger amounts of all the essential amino acids. You know what? And that's really a stupid, useless concept because the highest quality protein would be cannibalism, okay? Do you think that's a good idea? No, it's not. Okay, it's not healthy and it's not ethically a good idea too. And this is also where you get into this question of, we talked about this in separate lectures, science and atheism. Basically, if humans are created in the image of God and we're partly a divine creature, it's disgusting, amoral thought for cannibalism. But if we're just a talking primate, chimps will eat another chimp, cows are fed cows, then what does it matter? So you have to ask yourself, what is your ethical, moral foundation? I believe in God and I believe we're created in the image of God. Okay, so anyways, plant proteins are usually not complete except for soy. Soy is almost complete. That's another reason why I don't like soy. I know you got all this advertising, peer pressure. You're supposed to say you like soy. I don't think it's a healthy food. And that's I got a whole other lectures on that. Quinoa is near complete. But it's not that bad. Quinoa is not so bad, but just so you're aware of it. Okay, animal protein, a lot more BCAA, branched chain amino acids, especially leucine activating mTOR, increasing cancer risk. We talked about methionine. Okay, so here's the saving grace of beans. Beans are relatively low in methionine, also in cysteine, another sulfur-containing amino acid. So even though beans have a lot of protein, they're low in methionine and cysteine. If I had cancer, I would probably minimize my intake of beans too. I want to be low overall in protein. And there was some research suggesting total protein intake reduction increases longevity. That's not as solidly confirmed as just overall caloric intake. As soon as you eat a starch-based diet, you're lowering your total calorie intake. Meat also elevates insulin-like growth factor associated with increased cancer. Increased animal protein intake elevates your blood cholesterol. I think it just puts the body into a hyper-anabolic phase. A herbivore, like humans have the physiology primarily of a herbivore, basically the only time it eats animal protein is when it's in a baby, drinking milk to speed up growth. Okay, lysine. Beans are kind of high in lysine, which is not that great of a thing. All these other grain-like things, for example, and these other starches, potatoes, sweet potatoes, are very low in lysine, which is good. rice, potatoes, sweet potatoes are pretty much low in everything, which is good. Here's just one more thing showing some of these numbers if you're curious how potatoes are an incredibly wonderful food. Look at this, almost no fat. There's no such thing as being too low in dietary fat. Okay, all this good fat stuff you hear is all nonsense just to keep you fat and sick. So rice and potatoes, fantastically low in fat. Oatmeal is a little higher in fat, 15%. Don't get me wrong, I think oatmeal, plain oatmeal with water is still a good food, but I wouldn't make it the main staple, 3 times a day. Like rice, you could eat it 3 times a day if it wasn't for the arsenic. Soy, look at soy. It's got 37% fat, a lot of estrogen, lots of protein. The other beans got a lot of protein as well. Look at the apples just as an example of fruit. Only 1% of calories from protein. Now that's good. Okay, I got to change the slide here. Okay, we're almost done here. This is just showing the basic structure of an amino acid. There's a carbon in the center of it, and that's called the alpha carbon. So here's the symbol for alpha. Here's the carbon in the center. It's called amino because there's an amino on one side, but it's called an acid because there's a carboxylic acid on the other side of the alpha carbon. There's a little hydrogen above. Remember, H for hydrogen, H for like a head, and then there's the variable part of the 20 different amino acids. There's about 20 of them that matter to humans. And here is the R group. So you can, make that a more concise symbol. Just put the alpha in the center, the N for the amino, the C for the carboxylic acid, the H up here, and the R group down here. And then what I'll do is I'll just put the alpha because that's the only thing you need to know. And then I'll put the R group down here, and that'll be our symbol. Because now we're going to start getting a little bit more into the biochemistry. So if all you care about is nutrition, you can probably, skip the rest of this, but now it's more like for medical students who want to understand biochemistry. For anybody who wants to understand biochemistry, I'm going to go into like, how do I look at biochemistry? When I was a medical student, I was like the best student in the whole United States. Not just first in my class, but the best in the United States at biochemistry. And I'll just show you how I think, because my goal and the way I think about biochemistry is, number one, I viewed it as the language of God, and I think that's a good thing. There's a lot of stupid people who say, oh, science doesn't need God. They're idiots, okay? They're full of shit. Look at the greatest composer, Bach, the greatest artist, Michelangelo, the greatest scientist ever, Newton. They're all devout and religious. And I'm not saying you have to be religious to do science, but what I am trying to say is they actually work together in ways you don't expect. I viewed this stuff when I was learning it as the language of God, and that made my subconscious mind want to memorize it. What a great thing to learn the language of God. So I considered it a great opportunity to have a chance to learn this stuff. And so I'm going to show you how I think about stuff. When I was taking biochemistry, I saw it as like I had a competition with the teacher. I would want to try to know things better than the teacher. I wanted to try to show up, sit in the front row every day, read the night before, and not let the teacher get anything past me. And they would always get some stuff past me, but instead of being like, 90% of it like when I first started out, it would be a relatively small after time. 70% I would be able to understand right in the lecture, maybe a little more than that, and then go study the rest later. But I'm going to show you how you can be really strong at these basic biochemistry concepts. Okay, so first of all, I'll show a picture. What does the standard amino acid look like? It looks like a crucifixion, okay? There's the H for the head right above, the little tiny hydrogen popping up, the alpha carbon right in the center, right in here, if you will, the heart, if you will, and each arm going out, the amino arm, the carboxylic acid arm, and then the R group coming down. There's a beautiful painting called The Seven Sacraments by Rogier van der Weyden from 1445. And one of the reasons why I show this, he's an incredible artist, incredible paintings, but this is back in 1445. This is how good the painting really was. A lot of people don't know. A lot of people have never even heard of him, but he's a fantastic painter. Okay, now I'm going to show you another one of the secrets for understanding biochemistry based on this painting. And the concept is, what you want to do with biochemistry is learn structures as they relate to what you have to know. Sometimes you don't need structures. For amino acids, I think it's in your best interest if you're a biochemistry student to have a basic understanding of the structures, because if you're just trying to memorize categories of amino acids, it can be very difficult. And what I'd always do with biochemistry, I'd put out three or four textbooks, and I would sit there and I'd look at the pictures, and I'd say to myself, what is the irreducible minimum? What is the irreducible minimum from which all the rest can be derived? And I'll look. So let's just look at this painting here. This is called Descent from the Cross, also by Rogier van der Weyden from 1435. And you look at it and you're like, okay, Descent from the Cross, I've heard of this theme before, kind of boring, kind of depressing. Why would anybody want to look at this? Well, You can see the emotions, of course, that's interesting. But what's unique about this particular version of this painting is, notice the position of Jesus Christo in his arms. Notice the position of his mother Mary. They both echo each other, okay? Notice how it's almost as if with his arms turned this way, sideways, if you will, he looks like a bow, and as if they're pulling it back to pull back a bow and arrow. Okay, so what's the point? This painting was made, you know, based on sponsorship from the Archers Guild at that time. The different professional guilds would sponsor paintings for art contests. So this is the Archers Guild. So you can see he's shaped like a bow and arrow, as is she, and her with the most intense grief being the mother, you know, echoes his body position and is, you know, passing out because she's fainting. But anyways, this idea of components of mimicking structure, like chemical structure, is super useful for memorizing a lot of complex things in biochemistry, as we'll see on the next slide. Okay, so here's how you can memorize all the amino acids effectively and quickly. What you want to do is put them all out on a table, start looking at them, and ask yourself, how can I put this all together? What you're going to get taught in class is, these are the ones that are polar, these are nonpolar, these are charged, these are non-charged, these are acidic, these are basic, and that's all good. But I know from experience, if you just make a mnemonic for each category, that's pretty good. But if you can actually know the structures, you can just make sense out of stuff. So when you hear that amino acid, you don't have to memorize a category. You just go, I know from looking at it, that's what it is. So what I did was I just looked at all the structures here, you know, like here's a typical book, you know, biochemistry textbook, and then you can just, you know, draw them out once in hand and then see the pattern. So these are the mnemonics that hold it all together. Glycine's by itself, it's achiral. There's nothing quite like glycine. It's the smallest amino acid. Its side group is just an H. Then the single carbon amino acids, this mnemonic almost sounds like shit cap, but there's no I in there. But that'll help you remember all the single carbon R groups. MTG, just from 2 carbon R groups. VAP is 3 carbon R groups. IL is 4 carbon R groups. And I can, you know, you can make a joke out of it. With glycine, shit cap, you can have a meeting and vaporize the illness, all right? And that little mnemonic, as silly as it sounds, that gives you all the amino acids. So here's how it works. Here's a glycine. R group is just an H. You can know other things about it. Glycine having a small R group fits well into active sites of enzymes, so you can fit the substrate molecule and know better. That's basically what an enzyme does, is it gets the substrates to be close together and lowers the energy of activation so the process of reaction can proceed. The glyphosate in Roundup, the active ingredient, that is thought, according to Stephanie Seneff in particular, to mimic the structure of glycine such that it can potentially, she believes, get into proteins and thus damage the protein function. And here's another mnemonic. Gly can fly because it's so small. So anyways, that's glycine. You have to know glycine. It's also a neurotransmitter. And now we're going to do the single carbon amino acid. Alanine just has a single carbon right here. A single carbon. That's it. That's its R group. Just, you know, a methyl group. A single carbon. All right, and then you can, right off alanine, you can build all these other ones. They're all in black ink. The way I worked it was the glycine's in blue ink. The single carbon stuff is in black ink. The 2 carbon R groups are in red ink. The 3 carbon R groups are in green ink. The 4 carbon R groups are in purple ink. And then I put yellow highlighter around the basic mnemonics and around these individual amino acids. I know the dog's barking. I'm almost done here. And these concepts from here on out are really simple. So serine, you just throw a hydroxyl group onto the carbon, 1 carbon. Histidine, you just put an imidazol group onto the 1 carbon. Tryptophan, you put just an indole group onto the single carbon. And you make serotonin from that, 5-hydroxytryptophan, okay? Cysteine, you just put a thiol group on there, SH, on the single carbon. Aspartate, you just throw a carboxylic acid on there. Aspartate's also an excitatory neurotransmitter. It's very much similar to glutamate. I consider it like baby glutamate, and that's the one that's thought to potentially have an excitotoxin effect from aspartame, the sweetener. It's another good reason to avoid it. I wouldn't ever eat anything with aspartame in it, you know. Typical stupid, because I see, you know, young stupid people, adolescents, 20-somethings, they think they know everything and they don't know anything, and they'll be, you know, chewing this aspartame gum, drinking this diet soda pop, you know, and you try talking to them and they just look at you like, oh, what do you know, old person? And, you know, it's amazing. They've got that sense of immortality, but they're totally ignorant. Okay, asparagine, it's a carboxyamide, just meaning instead of a carboxylic acid, you have an amino group in there instead of an OH group, okay? Phenylalanine, it should really be called alanine phenyl, because like alanine, just has a single carbon and then a phenyl group on there. You just add on a hydroxyl group, and now you got tyrosine. You know, if you add another hydroxyl group on there, you'd have a catechol, like in the catecholamines, for example. And you can go down this other pathway of making dopamine, for example. All right, well, anyways, now in the double carbon group for methionine, you got 2 carbons, and then you have the sulfur ester there. And that, of course, is a super important amino acid, as we just talked about. And I have them all in the order of their mnemonic as well. So there'll be M, then the T is a threonine, which is really just like serine, but an extra carbon here. Glutamic acid, glutamate when it's deprotonated, you know, same thing, 2 carbons, and then the carboxylic acid group, okay? And then you can also interchange glutamine with glutamic acid, and you just put a nitrogen on there, so it's a carboxyamide. And you see how this mnemonic is, all these amino acids are in order of their mnemonic. And what you should do if you're a medical student studying biochemistry is just draw this thing out, practice so you can see it all in your head. Walk around in a circle in your apartment or wherever you live and just say them out loud yourself. I call that a walk and talk. And the benefit of this is now you have them all in your head. You should be able to see them all in your head and be able to draw them all real fast, just like this diagram here. And when you can do that, you're pretty relaxed coming up for a test. You're not worried about remembering them or recognizing them. You could draw them all. You could produce all the information. So you're real confident going into a test, and because of that, you sleep better, you go to bed earlier the night before, and you just do better. You have true knowledge. The VAP is the 3 carbons one, so valine is shaped like a V. It starts with the letter V. Proline, you just have a valine, but then you react it back with its amino group. Arginine, you know, is just this unusual thing. It almost looks like a gangbang on the last carbon there. Isoleucine, leucine, and lysine are ILL, so like I said, you know, lysine should cap meeting to vaporize illness, all right? But that's easy to remember, and then you do a walk and talk and say them all back to yourself. So here's the structures of them. And leucine is the branch chain amino acid that really activates mTOR the most, meaning that it promotes cell replication, and it's thought to be quite worrisome if you have cancer. You don't want to be eating large amounts of this. That's another reason why I think keto diets for cancer, to me, it sounds like a very stupid idea. I actually think, I know the people promoting it, their whole logic, I think they're right on the idea of there's a definite metabolic component to cancer, but they're wrong on thinking that high-fat diet's the way to go. I mean, that's completely stupid. So anyways, hope this was helpful to you.